Hello, this is today's Live from Paris. It's 6 a.m. here in the French capital. Let's get you up to date with our headlines. Outrageous or necessary? Democrats condemn Trump's firing of the FBI chief, while the White House says it's moved to restore confidence in the organisation. We'll have the latest from our correspondent in Washington. South Korea's new president takes his oath of office, promising a new era of negotiation with the North, which he says he'll visit under the right circumstances. And France's National Front loses a rising star as Marion Maréchal Le Pen steps down from politics. Marine Le Pen's niece is one of the far-right's most popular politicians. Also coming up in the programme, could it be the end to the Whirlpool saga that dominated the French presidential campaign? Factory employees have gone back to work, but for how long? Find out in business. And find out also why a shortage of spuds in Japan is producing a crisis for snackers. That's coming up later in the programme. It's a move that's shocked Washington. For only the second time in history, a US president has fired an FBI director. The abrupt decision came out of the blue for James Comey as he was set to address agents in Los Angeles. The White House's reason for Comey's dismissal? That he mishandled the investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of personal emails for state business. But for Democrats, that's just a cover for the real reason.
I told the President, Mr. President, with all due respect, you are making a big mistake. Why did it happen today? We know the House is investigating Russian interference in our elections that benefited the Trump campaign. We know the Senate is investigating. We know the FBI has been looking into whether the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians. A very serious offense. Were these investigations getting too close to home for the president?
Well, let's get the latest from our Washington correspondent, Philip Crowther. Philip, we heard there from Chuck Schumer that he wasn't convinced by the timing of this decision. What can we deduce from Trump's decision to do this now rather than earlier in the year?
That is the really big question that we're all asking ourselves here in Washington. No one really has the concrete answer to that one, and it seems like the White House might not either. Here is what's going on in terms of timing. The FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, is currently investigating the possibility of collusion between the Trump campaign, the Trump transition team, and Russian intelligence agencies. And that investigation is, or rather was, being helmed by James Comey, the now former director of the FBI. That is the timing of this announcement. Now, the reason given in the letters that were given to Donald Trump by the Department of Justice were amazingly and surprisingly, the reason given there was the unfair handling of the investigation into the Hillary Clinton email scandal. She was being treated unfairly, apparently, says the deputy of the Department of Justice. Now, that doesn't ring true to most people, and certainly doesn't to Chuck Schumer, as you just heard there. And when you go back to the letter that Donald Trump signed and sent to the now former director of the FBI, well, he does take the whole thing back to the Russia investigation. Donald Trump in that letter says that he is firing James Comey despite the fact that he told him 3 times he was not involved in those investigations. The letter, by the way, very harshly worded from Donald Trump. He says this, I am hereby terminating and removing you from office. That the letter sent by Donald Trump to James Comey.
And you touched on it there, Philip, but where does this leave the FBI and its investigation into allegations of Russian interference in the election?
First of all, leaves the FBI without a director all of a sudden. James Comey had no idea this was coming, and the White House seemingly hasn't lined up a replacement. The White House wasn't prepared for this and doesn't know who might possibly be replacing James Comey, and whoever it might be will have to go through a very, very tough confirmation process in the US Senate. As for the Russia investigation, well, it's in serious danger now. There are investigations underway in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, and by the FBI. But what happens to that one now? That the man who was at the helm of it is no longer there and has been fired by the man who was maybe being investigated directly by the FBI. That we do not know at this point. And what is happening here in Washington tonight is there are a lot of comparisons being made to the Watergate scandal, because this is a president who seems to be taking this into his own hands, might have noticed that an investigation was getting that little bit too close to home, too close to the White House, and took this into his own hands. Essentially what Donald Trump did here tonight. He got rid of the man who was investigating not necessarily the president himself, but certainly the possibility of collusion between the team of then candidate Donald Trump and Russia. That is something very serious indeed, and an astounding move by the White House here tonight.
Philip Crowther in Washington, thank you. Well, against this backdrop, Donald Trump is due to meet the Russian foreign minister at the White House later. Syria is supposed to be topping the agenda, but it's difficult to see how the two won't end up discussing the continuing investigation into Russia's alleged meddling in last year's US election, given what's been happening in Washington. Trump's meeting with Sergei Lavrov could signal an improvement in ties that Trump recently described as being at an all-time low. Well, earlier on Tuesday, the White House announced it was to supply arms and military equipment to Kurdish YPG fighters battling the Islamic State group in Syria. It's a move that's likely to antagonise Turkey, a key ally of the US, which labels the Kurdish forces terrorists. Turkish warplanes have been carrying out strikes on Kurdish YPG forces in Syria over the last month. Charles Pellegrin reports.
Donald Trump is changing gears in Syria and ruffling feathers in Turkey. His administration announced it will be supplying arms to a Syrian Kurdish group known as the YPG. As part of the Syrian Democratic Forces, the group's aim is to regain control of the Islamic State group's stronghold of Raqqa. But Turkey's labeling of the YPG group as a terrorist organization could complicate matters.
We're keenly aware of the security concerns of our coalition partners in Turkey. We want to reassure the people and the government of Turkey that the U.S. is committed to preventing additional security risks and protecting our NATO ally. The U.S. continues to prioritize support for Arab elements of the SDF.
For Defense Secretary James Mattis, Kurdish militias and their allies are best suited to lead the assault on Raqqa. But that's only the first part of the plan.
The only reason we are fighting right now is to free the people and throw the threat off balance. Once we get that threat subdued, then the real work begins, as some people put it, to actually exploit the enemy being banished.
This decision could prove to be a turning point in U.S.-Turkey relations. Ankara is wary of Kurdish forces gaining strength on its border. The issue will no doubt be a central talking point when Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Donald Trump meet next week.
Let's leave the US now and take you over to South Korea, where the new president has just been sworn in. It's just a day after he won the election by a landslide. Moon Jae-in is expected to be swift in announcing major cabinet appointments in order to put an end to the power vacuum left by the removal of his predecessor in a corruption scandal back in March. A former human rights lawyer, Moon is left-leaning and backs engagement with the North. Well, for more on South Korea's new president, let's go live now to our correspondent, Andrew Salmon, who's in Seoul. Andrew, Moon says he's willing to visit North Korea under the right circumstances. Are we likely to see a change in South Korea's foreign policy?
I think very much so. We're almost certainly going to see a much more a move more towards détente, more towards rapprochement with North Korea than we've seen over the last, 10 years of two right-wing conservative governments. The question, of course, is, which is irking diplomats here now, is how well this move might play with South Korea's closest ally, Washington, D.C., which is, the Trump administration's North Korea policy is not that clear. On the one hand, they're moving carrier battle groups to the peninsula. Donald Trump is talking about a possible war with North Korea. But of course, Trump is also saying he'd be willing to meet Kim over burgers and would be honored to meet him. So possibly Moon Jae-in and Donald Trump can find common ground, a pragmatic sort of engagement policy with North Korea. The other sort of diplomatic issues related to this.
Oh, I'm sorry. We appear to be losing the connection there with Andrew. We will try later on in the programme to get that back if we can. But now let's look at some of the other stories that we're following here at France 24. Carry-on computers may soon be banned on European flights to the US as the Department of Homeland Security looks into widening security measures before the summer travel season starts. In March, the US banned passengers on direct flights to the US from airports in 8 countries from carrying larger electronic devices on board. Those countries were largely in North Africa and the Middle East. The Palestinian leader says he's ready to welcome Donald Trump to the Palestinian territories in a visit that could happen later this month. Mahmoud Abbas also said he's ready to meet Israel's Prime Minister as part of the US President's peace efforts. Trump is expected in Israel later this month as part of his first foreign trip, and he's not ruled out the possibility of a presidential visit to the West Bank. Chelsea Manning, the US soldier jailed for one of the largest leaks of classified documents in US history, has thanked former President Obama for commuting her sentence. Manning was jailed in 2013 for passing more than 700,000 classified documents to WikiLeaks. She says that for the first time, she can now see a future for herself. She's due to be released next week. Well, let's take you to France now, or bring you to France, rather, where we're marking the abolition of slavery here. Both incoming and outgoing presidents, Emmanuel Macron and François Hollande, will be presiding over a ceremony in a few hours' time here in central Paris, remembering the slave trade and the abolition of slavery back in 1848. The commemoration will come after President Hollande leads the final cabinet meeting of his term at the Élysée Palace this morning. Well, meanwhile, the French far right has lost a rising star after Marine Le Pen's niece announced she's stepping down from politics. 27-year-old Marion Maréchal Le Pen is one of the Front National's 2 MPs in the lower house of Parliament. She's also one of the party's most popular politicians. Laurent Bechdecker has the story.
Another blow for France's far right. Marion Maréchal Le Pen, one of only 2 National Front lawmakers currently in Parliament, is retiring from politics, at least for the time being.
I think the time of politicians living in their ivory towers has come to an end. I am not permanently giving up on my political struggle.
A move that shouldn't come as a huge surprise. A month ago, Maréchal Le Pen hinted she wanted to take a step back from politics to spend more time with her 3-year-old daughter.
I've always said that I wouldn't work in politics my whole life.
Yet there may be more than personal factors at play. Marion Maréchal Le Pen became increasingly vocal regarding her disagreements with her aunt, Marine Le Pen, whom she accuses of being too moderate. A split that became apparent when Marine Le Pen said she wouldn't give her niece a position in her government.
She's young, she's quite stiff, a bit like the French youth, which seems to be getting more uptight.
Is she too green to hold a government position?
Yes, probably.
Maréchal Le Pen is also a virulent critic of National Front Vice President Florian Philippot, whom she claims commands too much influence. She remains one of the party's most popular figures.
And now, salt and vinegar. Barbecue or just plain salted? What's your flavour? Well, whatever it is, if you're a crisp fan, spare a thought for consumers in Japan, because they're facing a potato crisp crisis. Here's Martin Pollard to tell us why.
The great Japanese crisp shortage continues and consumers aren't happy.
I can't buy my favourite crisps, it's shocking.
I love crisps. It's outrageous that they've run out. My tomato-flavored crisps must return.
The crisis has been all over the news.
Many Japanese crisp companies have decided to suspend or even cancel sales.
Supermarkets have run out of stock, leaving shelf after shelf empty of one of the nation's most popular snacks.
Normally, these shelves are filled with crisps, but I've had to fill the space up with other products.
Typhoons and floods are the cause. They hit the main potato-growing region of Hokkaido last year. This led to the worst harvest since 1983, when records began. And restrictions on imports mean companies can't easily use foreign spuds instead. The scarcity has driven some to take special measures.
I knew that we'd have a problem, so I decided to put some in reserve.
Others are taking to online auctions. Bidding for most packets starts at a few euros, but rarely stays that way.
The prices are crazy. Unbelievable. So many people are bidding. Look how the prices are going up.
But no bids yet for these two packets, which have a starting price of 300,000 yen. That's more than 2,000 euros. Companies say they might try growing spuds elsewhere in Japan to fill the shortfall.
It's just after 6:15 here in the French capital. Let's remind you of our headlines. Outrageous or necessary? Democrats condemn Trump's firing of the FBI chief, while the White House says it's moved to restore confidence in the organisation. South Korea's new president takes his oath of office, promising a new era of negotiation with the North, which he says he'll visit under the right circumstances. And France's National Front loses a rising star as Marion Maréchal Le Pen steps down from politics. Marine Le Pen's niece is one of the far right's most popular politicians. Let's look at the business news now with you today. And as the new South Korean President Moon Jae-in takes office today, creating jobs and ending corruption will be two of the main items on his to-do list. Alison Sargent has more on how the new president plans to tackle his top economic priorities.
They helped transform South Korea into Asia's fourth largest economy. Chaebol, Korea's famous family-owned conglomerates, were once the country's economic savior. They're now seen as holding it back, stifling new businesses, keeping their profits overseas, and abusing their power to collude with the government. Moon Jae-in has vowed to end the era of Chaebol dominance by cutting government ties with the families that run them. That could also open up more employment opportunities, particularly for young Koreans. Youth unemployment has reached record highs, topping 11% in March. As president, Moon has promised to create 810,000 public sector jobs during his 5-year term. A third of those would be reserved for younger workers. To finance job creation, he plans to increase the budget by $8.8 billion. Other campaign pledges include boosting consumer spending power, raising the minimum wage, and injecting momentum into Korea's flagging economy. All promises that helped propel him to victory and usher in a new era of Korean politics.
Let's take a little look at the markets now. Stock markets have been rising this Tuesday as volatility dropping. Let's look at Wall Street first of all. A mixed, fairly muted close for Wall Street. Nasdaq and S&P hitting new record highs before for a second session in a row, although the S&P then dipping down after that. Trade on the Nasdaq powered in part by Apple, which has broken through $800 billion for the first time. And then Asian markets, so Asian stocks edging a little bit higher for a third consecutive day as investors focus on strong corporate earnings, and the dollar gave back some of its recent gains after a rise in political tensions that we've been seeing. Now, workers at an appliance factory in northern France have ended a strike and returned to work, knowing that their jobs won't be there for much longer. Over the weekend, unions gave in and signed a deal outlining the terms for the factory to be closed next year. The future of the Whirlpool site grabbed international headlines last month when both Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen spoke to workers there on the same day, each hoping to curry support and show their sympathy for the struggling working class. Alison Sargent has the story.
The media blaze has finally died down, and employees of Whirlpool are returning to work. But their days back on the job are numbered. On Friday, they signed a deal with employers accepting the factory's relocation from Amiens to Poland next year. In exchange, unions negotiated compensation, including severance pay of up to 70,000 euros.
We signed this deal, but we weren't proud of it.
We'll lose our jobs in June 2018. Everyone will be thrown out like dirty tissues once again.
Whirlpool employees were thrust into the spotlight 2 weeks ago when France's presidential finalists made competing visits to their picket line on the same day. Greeted by workers with boos and whistles, the man who would become president did his best to reassure them.
I won't make impossible promises. I will guarantee dignity. I will fight for another owner.
Now that Emmanuel Macron has been elected, the factory's employees hope he'll make good on his word.
I do believe in Mr. Macron.
What are you hoping for?
That we'll be given different jobs.
We want him to meet with us and tell us if he'll really make our case a priority and put strong pressure on our employers, or if he's going to throw it in the trash and wait for the fire to die down.
The search for a buyer to take over the factory site is now underway, in the hopes that it could bring back at least a portion of the some 600 jobs being lost.
Time now to check out what our tech team has been up to. And this week, Julia and Dan have been making friends with the latest and most human-like domestic robots out there.
For the last 6 years, the French company Cyberdroid has been designing the next generation of androids. A few months ago, we had brought on set Aria. Well, this time around, we're excited to introduce you to her little sister, Leanbee.
That's right. Leanbee is made by the Limoges-based company Cyberdroid. It's 4.5 feet in height and it measures around 35 kilograms. It's a companion robot, which means that it can be used in hospitality industries. It can also be used as a guide in museums. So if you are walking around the museum, you can just hold its hand. It can shake hands as well. You can just hold its hand and then you can inquire about the paintings or different pieces of art you see. And Leanbee will reply to your questions. So it is a truly companion robot. It can also take care of old people. That's one of the plans in the future. Now, some of the key components or some of the key features of this robot are that it has multiple sensors, so it can recognize faces. So that's the role played by artificial intelligence inside it. It is also run by a powerful computer with an Intel i5 processor. It has multiple cameras for detection of obstacles. It also has a microphone, so you can converse with it. It apparently converses fluidly in English. You can ask all sorts of questions. So yeah, all in all, it's truly a companion robot.
And now let's talk about this robot. It's actually still a prototype, but this little fellow is already very intelligent. It's called E4.
Yeah.
And what is it made for?
Well, when I heard E4, I thought it was the first chess move, you know, one of the first chess moves is either E4 or D4, but no, it has got, there's a connection with Greek mythology. So in Greek mythology, it means a guardian. So it's a smart robot. It will take care of your home. It can detect multiple things, like it can detect smoke. So the moment it detects smoke, it will send you an alert on your mobile phone through a dedicated application. It can also detect spillage on floor. So if you have spilled water or coffee or any other liquid, it will tell you that this part needs to be taken care of. It will also detect open windows. So if you have left a window open by chance and you have got out, it can detect that as well, and it will send you an alert. So these are some of the functionalities, and it has multiple sensors, again, similar to, which is very common in robots these days. It has a 360-degree camera. On the top. On the top, at the front, you'll have two cameras. One is a high-definition camera, and then there is a camera for sensing depth, and as well as to map out wherever it goes. And one of the key features is, again, it has artificial. It also boasts of artificial intelligence. It can recognize faces, and one of the best features of this bot is that it can send alerts if there are intruders in your house. So you can
right.
just...
And I think there's even an alarm and...
It sends an alarm. So not only there's a flashing of light, there's an actual sound alarm as well. So it truly is a safety robot, and it doesn't need to be taken care of. The moment you turn it on, you leave it to its own discretion. Whenever it goes out of charge, it will automatically walk to the charging station and recharge on its own. So you don't have to take care of its charging as well. So this robot has been made by the Paris-based company called AI Mergence. And it is expected to be introduced in the first half of 2018. And the founders are aiming its cost to be around 1,000 euros.
So it is quite expensive. Now, we have other robots here on set, maker robots. Let's start with the spider robot. It really does look like a spider. It's creepy.
It does, and you're right. I find spiders very creepy. I played with it earlier, but I think I'm going to let it rest. Now, the point is that these three robots are a demonstration of how easy it's become to make robots. And this, for example, can be controlled by using a normal PlayStation controller. And these two robots are a bit different because they are called sumo robots. Their only purpose is to fight against each other. So you can have a bit of a combat here. Right. So you choose the other. Okay, you choose the blue one. Okay, here we go.
So how do you know which one's going to win?
It's all random. Let's see. Maybe the best will win. You win. Bravo.
That wasn't even a fight.
Plenty more still to come on the programme, including we'll be finding out what happens when the police won't detain the people looting your shops and attacking you. In Focus, find out what it means to be an immigrant in South Africa.